as I catch up on some of the mainstream movies that have been coming out over the last couple of weeks. I also had a chance to look at some movies that were outside of the mainstream. I'm always drawn to these low-budget or independent films. That's the place where I can find the most surprises, because bigger chances are made when the budget is low. This is Low Budget Binge, so let's start binging. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. The Salem Chronicles is new on demand and on digital download from Lionsgate. It's directed and written by Thomas J. Churchill. A police detective named Shane, played by Nathan Ken, finds out his estranged mother has passed away and travels to her house with his wife Joanna, played by Gina Vittori, to settle her estate, only to realize he has inherited his mother's house and a sickly old grandmother living in the top floor. Once there, the group find out that Shane's mother was heavily into the Wiccan culture, a culture leading all the way back to the Salem witch trials. Looking at that poster, I thought I was in for some raw and ragged witchy folk horror. That's what the poster suggests, with its handmade masks looming over you from above. I mean, look at that. Waking up to that would make my pants full forthwithly. Unfortunately, the Salem Chronicles is another common case of the cover, or in this case, the poster, not being representational of the contents inside. Paced snailily, the Salem Chronicles takes about 40 minutes to get into the true point of the story. Looking at my watch, and I did that a lot with this movie, unfortunately, it wasn't until the 45-minute mark until Shane and Joanne actually get the house and start experiencing the weird stuff. The film moves along slowly after that, but a lot of the info we received in the first half hour to 45 minutes of this hour-and-a-half movie is repetitive and seems to serve as padding for a film that feels as if it is about 45 minutes of meaty material, surrounded by another 40 minutes of fluff. The opener takes place during the Salem witch trials. Then we have an extended stint showing Shane investigating a ritualistic murder, and then there's the exposition drop about his mother. A lot of the stuff could have been shaved off to make it more succinct and allowing it to get to the main plot faster. The problem is that there really isn't a lot of original or potent content in the Salem Chronicles. I hate to say it, because this is a low-budget movie made by people who obviously didn't want to make a cheap horror film. There are moments where it seems the cast really tries to sell the drama, especially the two leads, which do share a lot of chemistry together. It's just that everything from the witch stuff to the ghostly apparitions that appear in the background just don't work on the gotcha jump scare level I think they were going for. Some of the witchy stuff works, as with the over-the-top acting of the grandmother and the final scene where the coven reveals itself. But the lead-in to it all is a very long and well-trodden road. It feels as if the Salem Chronicles wants to be a lo-fi Hereditary, but the scares didn't work for me. A lot of the witchy stuff doesn't offer anything new or shocking. Everything moves kind of like a bland Lifetime version of a horror movie, save for a few shocking jump scares and an admittedly shocking ending that really does go there. The Salem Chronicles didn't do anything for me and definitely doesn't live up to that awesome poster. Next up is Delivery Run. It's new on demand and on digital download from Saban Films. It's directed by Joey Palmroos and written by Joey Palmroos and Anders Holmes. A down-on-his-luck delivery driver named Lee, played by Alexander Arnold, encounters a mysterious snowplow on the snowy roads of Minnesota, which escalates to a fight for his life when the truck driver begins stalking him and trying to run him off the icy road. Delivery Run is inspired heavily by Steven Spielberg's Duel, right down to the mysterious yet unmistakably evil motives of the demented driver behind the wheel. Director Joey Palmroos and his co-writer Anders Holmes does a decent job of making things nice and dire for our driver for the bulk of the movie, keeping the pace brisk with a constant forward momentum. The best part of Delivery Run is that there's a whole other movie going on behind the scenes involving some kind of ancient rune knife, human sacrifice, and multiple abductions going on in the mountainous roads outside of this snowy Minnesota community. I like it that Lee factors greatly into the other story, but we as an audience never really are allowed enough information to understand the whole picture of what that backstory is. While this might prove to be maddening for those who need to know the entire story and prefer movies that lay it all out there, I felt it was a fresh way of telling an interesting character-driven story featuring Lee as the lead, even though he factors very little into the grand scheme of things. That said, the reason Duel worked so well is because the lead, Dennis Weaver, was a flawed but personable protagonist as David Mann to follow the entire time. We knew he was a family man and maybe a decent shit talker at his job, but he was an okay guy. In Delivery Run, Lee plays another fallible guy, but unlike Weaver's David Mann, Alexander Arnold's Lee isn't as likable because of some pretty big flaws established early in the film. Lee is in huge debt, but still, he makes the bonehead decision that when he does get a little money, he gambles it all away. While David Mann felt like an innocent guy trapped in a horrible race for his life, Lee has dug his grave for himself and is deserving of all of the horror due to his own poor choices. In the end, I didn't feel as connected with the lead in Delivery Run, and while Alexander Arnold does a decent job in the role, I couldn't find it in me to like the character, and that's a big problem. This also might be due to the fact that tonally, Delivery Run is all over the place. There's a lighthearted tone around the entire film, but then there are some pretty gruesome scenes that feel out of place with the lighter, almost cartoonish tone of the rest of the film. In the opening scene, Lee encounters a pissed-off debt collector with a cartoonish thug threatening him to hand over a bunch of money. Later, Lee drives his fish around with him since the thug broke the fish's aquarium. All of this goofiness contrasts extremely with the moments of high danger on the road, and it just didn't mix. Later, Lee happens upon the snowplow driver's home, and not only does it feel like too much of a coincidence for this to happen, but the horrors he finds inside just doesn't fit the goofy tone of the rest of the movie. Even when the truck driver is right on Lee's ass in the road, the stakes just don't feel high enough because Alexander Arnold plays things more comedically than it should be. Or I think also he fits into the more goofy comedic character role better than the straight man. So while I appreciate the chances Delivery Run's script took by not letting the viewer in on the main plot going on, keeping the focus on a smaller character in a bigger story, this chance just didn't pay off for me. There are some solid moments of road rage tension between Lee's little car and the giant snowplow, but the scattershot tone just didn't work. Had the film committed to one tone, I think I would have liked it more. I guess you could say I appreciate the guts it took Delivery Run for honoring Duel more than I liked the film itself. Match is streaming exclusively on Shudder. It's directed by Danishka Esterhazy and written by Al Kaplan and John Kaplan. After a bad run of matches on dating apps, Paula, played by Humberly Gonzalez, finally thinks she has met Mr. Right. The problem is Henry, played by Luke Volker, has an immune disease preventing him from going out for dinner. But Henry is willing to cook a meal for Paula at his house for their first date. Sounds kind of sketchy, right? That's what Paula's sister, Maria, played by Cheyenne Jimenez, thinks. Paula, though, has a good feeling about this guy and decides to go on the date. When she arrives, Paula meets Henry's mother, Lucille, played by Diane Simpson, who lives with Henry and tells Paula that Henry is out for a bit. This is the beginning of the date from the worst pits of hell, a date Paula may not survive. From Danishka Esterhazy, who was the director of 3 pretty solid films, the Slumber Party Massacre remake, Level 16, and the Banana Splits movie. Okay, well, 2 good ones and the Banana Splits movie, which isn't a bad track record. I'd add Match to that list of decent little efforts from the director. Sure, dating horror is a tired subgenre by now, and while I thought the recently released The Dead Thing was pretty solid, I feel the whole dating app culture to be revolting. No, I never used an app to get a date, and no, I probably never will. But many people do, so writing a horror film around it is an okay area to twist, I guess. Now I get it that the main reason dating horror films are popular is because it's a huge risk for women, and men for that matter, just to go on a date with an absolute stranger. I just wouldn't do that, so it doesn't really bother me that much. But because people do, it's understandable that this would be ripe material for the plucking. I think the reason why I liked Match was because it speeds past the cliched bad date montage and just drops our heroine in the middle of a perilous and twisted situation, spending the rest of the movie focusing on Paula's multiple attempts to escape this house of horrors. Henry is not who he seems. I know, shocker. I don't think this is a spoiler as the entire film hinges on this fact, and you find out within the first 20 minutes of the movie. Henry is a monster, a hunchback madman with a snake-like penis, looking to please his mother by impregnating his date and giving his mother some mutant grandkids to cuddle. So yeah, Match isn't one of those safe films. It's got some grunge on it, and because of that, I kind of dug it. Now, while I don't like dating app horror, I do like twisted, inbred killer family horror, a subgenre introduced to me in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I've loved it ever since. There's just something about the way these strange mutant families has their own systems that make the whole thing work that fascinates me. It's twisted, it's warped, and it's wrong as all get out. But still, I find it interesting how this family seems to work together against the world, and if not for this one final girl, they would have been continuing to function that way far into the future. Match takes a lot of time allowing us to get to know this awful and demented little family unit, and it's what makes the whole movie watchable for me. Paula is not the sharpest knife in the arsenal. She isn't written very smartly, and the script has her kind of tooling around the house for a little too long, avoiding Henry's wrath and wandering in circles. Humberly Gonzalez is perfectly okay in the role and is definitely easy on the eyeballs, but she just isn't really written as a smart person, or at least given something smart to do. The simple fact that she thinks it's a good idea to go to a complete stranger's house on a first date is indication that Paula isn't known for her wits. Still, compared to the rest of the freaks in this movie, Paula is the most likable of the bunch. Diane Simpson as Lucille is fun to watch as she cackles with glee as Henry goes on a rampage and screams at him like the chef in Texas Chainsaw Massacre when he fails. Simpson does a great job at being bad, and Jacques Adriance, who plays the real Henry, makes the monster pitiful and sensitive one minute, a rampaging beast the next, and the design of this creature is quite original and gross. I don't want to assume, but I do feel that if you're the type that takes a chance on a dating app, you're going to be creeped out by it. I feel the dating app horror is a little bit lightweight, and the horror involved in Match certainly is heavier than all of that. There's incest, there's masturbation, there's rape, there's mutilation, and there's a hunchback with a giant penis. So yeah, this isn't what I'd call PG horror for you to take your gal to on a date. But if you do like twisted horror that makes you shake your head and say under your breath, that's just damn wrong, then Match might be the right kind of wrong for you. The Draft, aka SETAN Alas, is streaming on Screambox. It's directed by Yusron Fuadi and written by Yusron Fuadi, Richard James Halstead, B.W. Purba Negara, Anindita, Suryarasmi. 5 students gather at a house in the middle of the woods only to discover that they are a part of a horror movie that is constantly being rewritten by a frustrated writer seeking to write the perfect horror film. As the writer goes through the different drafts of the script, the 5 students have to endure the horrors he comes up with in the story. But with the kids savvy to what is happening, they try to turn the tides on the writer and identify and conquer the tropes all horror movies go through in order to survive. Reminiscent of last year's meta-horror, Delicate Arch, with heaps of Scream, Adaptation, Until Dawn, and Cabin in the Woods tossed in, The Draft still feels fresh despite these similarities. The best parts of the film occur when the group are conscious that they are in a horror film and have to take on the various challenges thrown at them by using characteristics they create for themselves. Seeing the group forge their own destinies and backstories because the writer hasn't taken the time to do so is something that highlights the writer's blind spots while winking hard into the camera about how poorly developed characters often are in these horror movies. Over and again, these characters prove to be smarter than the guy writing them. That said, I wish more of the premise would have come about naturally in the film. The idea that these guys are all starring in a horror movie first starts out as some kind of coping mechanism come up with after the death of one of the kids. This seems to be a pretty mighty leap, but one of the kids is adamant that they are in a movie and then slowly turns the rest of the group into believing this theory. In order to convince the group, a whole lot of explaining of what is happening has to go on, and much of the film consists of the kids simply standing around and hypothesizing about what's happening, how they are existing solely as characters in a script, and debating on how to manipulate that to survive what the writer is throwing at them. A whole lot of the talky talk goes on that I feel drives the point home a bit too hard. The kids are too certain that they are these characters in a screenplay and accept this odd premise too wholeheartedly, too quickly, in my opinion. Still, The Draft proves to be a very fun movie despite a truckload of exposition dropped. The acting is solid, with all the character tropes being represented, yet still, the actors make their roles their own. I like the various threats the kids face. As they have this battle of wills with the writer, it proves to be quite the existential little film. The Draft makes you wonder if someone really is up there writing all of this crazy stuff that occurs in one's life. While low in scope and staying within the confines of the house and the woods around it for most of the film, the draft gets a lot of bang for its buck, with the monstrous threats looming from all sides. I like this meta-horror flick quite a bit, despite the fact that it explains itself for the cheap seats in the audience a bit too much. Finally, we have Other, which is new streaming on Shudder. It's directed by David Moreau and written by John Goldman and David Moreau. When her reclusive mother dies, Alice, played by Olga Kurylenko, reluctantly returns to her childhood home to sign some papers and finds herself trapped in the home for the weekend. Unbeknownst to Alice, there is some kind of creature lurking in the surrounding forest that has an appetite for faces. David Moreau was behind last year's Mads, which was a one-take infection movie, the Jessica Alba flick The Eye, and of course the phenomenal Ils, aka Them. So when a new movie is released by this guy, I pay attention. With Other, he delivers another highly stylistic and moody film that meanders a bit in the middle, but ends up working marvelously by the time it all ends. Other would fall on its face without the brilliant performance from its lead, Olga Kurylenko. The actress has gotten a long way on her supermodel looks, but here she really embodies a damaged soul, surviving what seems to be horrifying abuse from her mother as seen through videotapes Alice finds in the home. Through these tapes, it seems as if Alice's mom was a typical beauty pageant mom, lording over her very young daughter through strict oversight, cruel verbal abuse, and rigorous physical torture to look the part of the model. Seeing Kurylenko's face deflate while rewatching and re-experiencing this abuse is heartbreaking. For the entire film, the focus is on Kurylenko's Alice, and while there is a bit of an overlong section of self-pity on Alice's part in the middle, the film picks back up in the climactic battle with the monster. Still, she carries this film firmly on her shoulders every arduous step of the way. And when I say the entire focus of this film is on Alice, I mean it. Right up until the very end, no other faces are seen in Other. Every other tertiary character, Alice's boyfriend, the maintenance guy, the rescue workers, the police investigators, the people in the hospital, all of them have their faces obscured in one way or another. Of course, there is a point to all of this. Alice's true self was scrubbed away and tied up in a little bow as a child by her mother. The entire point of the film is about identity and how our parents can take that away from us. So by obscuring the focus of the rest of the cast, including the monster stalking her in the background, the focus is squarely on Alice, who herself is attempting to understand her own identity at what seems to be the lowest point in her life. This lack of faces isn't made completely clear until a bit into the movie, when you realize everyone talking with Alice is through a broken or obscured screen, or masked in some way, or simply cut out of the frame like the parents in a Peanuts cartoon. The fact that the adults are not seen in Peanuts or this film suggests some type of connection, possibly saying that this is a story about children, as even though Alice is an adult, she does have a stunted life. These children are trying to find out who they are and where their place is in the world. Moreau didn't go so far as to have the other actors sound like a muted trombone, but he comes damn near close a few times. This could have been a simple style choice to appear smart by the director, but as the story goes on, the mystery deepens, as does Alice's connection with the monster roaming the grounds and eating away its victims' faces. Yet another means to not show faces in this film. These scenes are terrifying, and the late-in-the-game revelations really hone in on how extreme the abuse Alice survived really was. No spoilers here, but the revelations in the last 15 minutes prove to be highly intense and not for the squeamish. The acting of Kurylenko and the stylistic choices by Moreau really does elevate Other from a typical monster-on-the-loose flick to something quite personally devastating. It reminded me somewhat of the overlooked indie gem from a year or two ago, Cuckoo, that proved to be a bit too artsy and surreal for mainstream audiences. Other will hit in the same way, as it deals with some very uncomfortable themes of abuse and motherhood. Still, I was blown away by the lead performance, as well as the mystery once it was completely unfolded. This is a powerful one that proves Moreau is a filmmaker that deserves a much larger audience. Well, that should be more than enough indie horror gems for you to check out. Have you seen any of these? Are you gonna? Let me know down in the comments. Please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be.